Hey guys, welcome back. Chris here with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. Welcome back to a weekly used gun review. Remember, in these videos, we take 6 used firearms that have come into our store, either through our front door in our store in Westfield or through our website, WeBuyGuns.com. Give you guys a short sort of summary or historical review of each, giving you guys an idea of some different things that are out there on the market. We start with the most common and move through the least common as the video progresses, so make sure you stay into the end to see some interesting things. So if that sounds interesting to you, please stick around. That's coming up now. Alright guys, starting us off with this video, we're doing something a little bit unconventional for the weekly used gun review because this is neither used nor did it come in from a local customer, through our website. This is the Steyr AUG A3 M2. I always have to look at the model designations. I can never keep them right in my head. This is their newest version of the Styer AUG, but this one is actually a 9mm, which makes it like the MP88. Now, I talked about the STG-77 with the commemorative AUG we had in the previous weekly used gun review video, so I thought it would be fitting to start with this as it sort of adds on to the story from last week's video. I personally am a huge fan of the Styer AUG, so when I saw this hit the market, I went to my distributor and ordered one just because I wanted to get my hands on it. And while I had it, and because we just talked about the Styer AUG a couple weeks ago, I wanted to go ahead and throw this in this video. So bear with me. Quickly to recap, the Styer AUG was adopted by the Austrian military service as the STG-77 in 1977. It was standard caliber 5.56 NATO that fed from detachable box magazines. Now, around the 60s, 70s, 80s, as we're going through, a lot of modern militaries are moving away from the full-powered rifle cartridge and going into intermediate calibers as their primary issue rifle. Now, the Styer AUG was the first widely adopted bullpup rifle that saw really good amount of or notable military service outside of its own country of development. So Austria used these, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, Argentina, just to name a few places. Now, other popular designs like the L85 in Great Britain, although not too popular in Great Britain, or the FAMAS in France, did not see wide-scale service outside of their own countries. This was a very revolutionary, interesting design that was way ahead of its time. It incorporated unique systems like removable barrel systems or quick change barrel systems like you see in movies like Die Hard, for example. Now, that would lead itself to the ability for interesting not only use conversions, but caliber conversions. As we go back to the Second World War, submachine guns, like primary use submachine guns, would sort of fall by the wayside following the end of the Second World War. Where you start to see submachine gun use is in specialized tactics roles, such as specialized units in different militaries, or specialized police use in counterterrorism organizations and things like that. So very specific sort of premeditated purposes is where you start to see submachine guns being used, especially in close quarter type of engagements or applications. Now, Austria, like every other country around the world, is starting to look at their own at-home domestic submachine gun, something that they can incorporate to be used around that same time for the same type of application. Now, they had looked abroad. You do see that the HK MP5 is taking the world by storm after its development through the 60s. Uzi Ogal's Uzi in Israel is a very easy to manufacture, mass production type of submachine gun. And that would be the very firearm that Austria would start to look at. So in the 1960s, they would come out with the MPI-69, very Uzi-looking type of submachine gun that fed from a box magazine, very similar to this without the mag catch on it, straight 9mm mag. Now, that would, again, serve well, very easy to produce, very successful firearm. They would see some revisions in 1981, so you have the 6981, and was suitable for its needs. Now, by the mid to late 1980s, Austria wanted to centralize around a very standardized design. So they had taken, again, the Styer AUG that was easily adaptive to other applications, and they thought, how can we convert this into the submachine gun role? And this will be our new subgun moving forward, not only for specialized military application, but most importantly for police use. So in 1988, they would come out with essentially what was this. It was called the MP88, Machine Pistol 88. It used the MPI-69 style box magazines, and it was relatively simple to design and implement. Now, there were some differences in the receiver and the stock. for the most part, it was pretty easy to take the standard AUG design and kind of convert it over, if you will, into a 9mm platform. Now, the earlier versions, of course, coming out in the 80s were more mimicked or reminiscent of the A1 pattern or the STG-77 of the AUG, so it had a fixed 1.5 power optic one-piece receiver. Actually, mostly were in black stocks. That was basically it. I mean, if you look at it functionally, that's how it appeared. One other difference is the stocks are actually molded with shell deflectors in them as well, which you don't see on the 5.56 variants, including this one. Now, over the years, Steyr had imported 9mm parts kits, or 9mm conversion kits, if you will, removable sort of magazine adapters, barrels, bolts, and I believe that that's actually all you would need, and then the 9mm magazines. Because of importation restrictions, very few of those have come in, and Steyr never really put out any type of modern, or Steyr USA, I should say, any type of modern 9mm conversion until just recently. Now, Steyr just released a new version of the A3 M2, which is this, which allows now a sort of handguard to go over it. It's identical to this in the 5.56 version. And they've made this sort of to be purchasable as a 9mm carbine like this. And again, the main differences are the magazine adapter, the barrel, the bolt, and that's it. I believe this is actually just their standard stocks and receivers. I believe it's just all it is, again, adapter, bolt, barrel. And those are parts that are very easy to swap out with your 9 or your 5.56 parts to get yourself rolling in either direction. So I just thought it was a really cool product. I own several AUGs myself, so I just like when this came out. I missed the MP88 like commemorative version that they made about a year ago. Steyr does a horrible job of, in my opinion, sort of announcing new products, so I didn't even know that those were out until they were all gone. So when I knew that they were coming out with these, I got very excited, so I jumped on one. So anyway, that's just why I wanted to show you this. Again, this is brand new. They're everywhere on the market, so it's not like one of those things that you can't find or anything. So they just rolled them out. So anyway, really cool. I wanted to share that with you guys. And that is our #1 spot, the Steyr Arms AUG A3 M2 9mm or the MP88. All right, up next is a rifle that comes to us from a local customer, so big thank you for selling us this one. This is the Brownells BRN-16 A1, and it is a modern clone or replica of the very popular Colt M16 A1 rifle used by the United States primarily during the Vietnam War conflict. Now, to look at quickly the abridged history of this rifle, original designs were by Eugene Stoner, who worked for Armalite, which was a division of Fairchild, which manufactured lightweight aircraft components. Because of Eugene Stoner's knowledge and access to machines and tooling and his knowledge of how to use lightweight components, he decided that he could apply that sort of knowledge and equipment towards firearm use. So he would come up with a variation of this very early prototypes, leading into the Armalite 10, the AR-10 rifle. See a lot of design iterations over the years. Now, earlier on in early stages, they had a very difficult time with getting the United States military interested in this rifle until McNamara would get involved. I have a full hour-and-a-half long video of the history of the M16, which I will pin down below. Essentially, the rifle would start seeing a lot of revisions. It would go from the 601 to the 602 to the 603, which was this variant, the Army's variant. The 604 was the Air Force's variant. Main difference was a lack of a forward assist. And this would be the first type classified version accepted by the military as the M16 A1, making it the most iconic and most popular. Notable features are things like the teardrop forward assist, the A1 stock with the E-style stock with the fixed slant sling loop here, the very iconic triangular fore-end here. By the A1, they had gone to the birdcage and no longer used the 3-prong that you would see on the earlier versions and prototypes. And that was basically it. Now, where we get through to today. I don't know if a lot of you guys remember, but maybe within about the past 8 or so years ago, cloning became a really big thing. Now, AR builders have been putting these things together for a long time, but there was an era, and that was myself included, actually I have one of mine here I'll show you, where clone rifles started becoming very popular. This is one I put together about 8 or so years ago. This is an M16 A1 actual complete parts kit, including barrel, that I put together with a McKay Enterprises lower. And there were 2 companies that were very prominent with coming up with the retro correct receivers, the uppers and the lowers. Number one was McKay, which is where this comes from. You have the Ordnance accepted stamp on the front, which is why I chose it at the time, so I thought it was pretty cool. But the other, slightly more popular, was Nodak Spud. Nodak Spud makes AK receivers and things too, but they would make even the 605 uppers with the shaved forward assist. So they were, like myself, cloners, loved Nodak Spud. They were a very small operation, I think like 2 to 3 guys making those receivers. And when the demand for their product started really increasing, Brownells went to them and said, hey, there's this interest for these clone rifles. Nodak, you guys know the history and what parts correct stuff is, and you have this big following with all your cloners out there. And so what they did is they joined forces and they came out with a series of their retro line AR-15s, and they had every variation, which is pretty cool. So the XM16 A1, the 601, the 602, the 603 variants, the M16 A1, the 604, and then the XM177E2, so the carbine variants as well. I don't know, yeah, and I mentioned the 605. So they really had the sort of the full loadout with the help of Nodak Spud on these rifles. So these came out as the retro line. It was in sort of the XM gray coloration. It had all the features that you would want to see on a clone rifle. It was affordable. Previous to this, Colt had come out with a retro M16 that was like $2,500. So these were around the $1,000 mark. So way more affordable. Parts correct for the most part. There are a couple little gripes which I could get into in a completely different video, but it was great for what it was and for what it costed. Now, lately, Nodak has moved on to join forces with Palmetto. So I actually went on Brownells' website. They don't really have any parts availability. They don't have complete rifles anymore. And they have a little tab there that says build your own. And then you go there and it's only got like 1/5 of the amount of parts you would need. So, and not including the lower receivers. You go to Palmetto with the H&R stuff. It's really Nodak Spud, again, putting those sort of clone correct rifles together, which is where you're going to find mainly their complete built products now. So anyway, really cool. When I see these, this is sort of the first stab at the actual production assembly line AR-15s, retro line guns for the market, that these hit the market maybe 6-7 years ago. Again, no longer available for purchase in a complete rifle package, but really cool for what it was. So I just want to take the opportunity and point this out. Also, this furniture, although they came with the furniture like this, the furniture was new production. Previous owner of this actually put surplus M16 A1 furniture with a really cool rack number on it here on it. So anyway, again, wanted to point that out, share it with you guys, the BRN-16 A1. All right, up next is an interesting firearm that comes to us from a viewer in Idaho. So thank you so much for selling us this one. This is the Fostech Origin 12 semi-automatic 12-gauge shotgun. Now, although it has a look and appearance similar to a lot of the modern Turkish and Chinese sort of AK and AR shotguns that are flooding the market right now, this is very different. Those things sell around $200 to $300. These things sell around $2,000 to $3,000. So we'll explain a little bit why. Now, the story with this would actually begin with its introduction into the market in 2012 and its release at SHOT Show around 2013, 2014. They had a few different variations of the rifle. The standard full-length barrel version is 18 inches, so Title I weapon. Then they had an SBS version, short barrel shotgun, and an AOW version. So the SBS was a shortened barrel with the stock, had to file it as a short barrel shotgun NFA item. And the AOW was the breacher model. I don't know why it was classified as an AOW, but it was. AOW is any other weapon. So like the Serbu, Super Shorties, or a pistol with a vertical grip but no stock, for example. Those are AOWs, $5 tax stamp, but same processes apply as any other NFA item. What Fostech was noticing is that the Russian counterparts, the AK-based semi-automatic shotguns, are seeing a lot of success. So they are long stroke gas piston derived, principled off of the AK-47 or AKM, coming out of Sega and Vepr, and brought in from Russia. Okay, those are really popular in the early 2000s. For what they were, semi-automatic shotgun technology, one of the biggest problems is reliability, especially when you incorporate a magazine. So things like the Benelli M4 are very much on the short stick when it comes to what is something that is really combat effective, something that is really good and reliable. You incorporate the use of a magazine, you complicate things even further, which is one of the primary issues with the Segas and the Veprs. Now, those are fantastic shotguns. They do have some feeding issues occasionally, but for the most part, they are very sound designs. So, Fostech wanted to take the success of the AK pattern semi-automatic shotgun, fill in the gaps where the Sega could be modernized and made even more reliable, and they came up with this. So what you have again is the long stroke gas piston system like you would see in any AK platform, the Segas, the Veprs included. They had a detachable box magazine, but instead of just using what was already on the market, they came out with a proprietary box magazine. They came out with a 5 and 8 and a 10 rounder, and then they had, I believe, a 15 and 20 or the 20 and 25 round drums. I can't remember the capacity on those off the top of my head. They modernized it by incorporating a lot more polymer to keep it lighter. They have a collapsible AR-15 style stock and buffer tube, which does fold. I'm doing this upside down. What do I need to grab here? Well, trust me, it does fold. Can we, here, let me put it right side up for myself. There we go. It does fold over to the side. It can be fired like this. It has a top cover latch similar to an AK or Vepr or Sega, anything like that. Fluted barrel and a gas regulator, so you can use a shotgun shell to adjust your gas setting. It is known as having a self-cleaning piston, so they state that you could fire 1,000 to 1,500 rounds without any need for cleaning. This, and probably one of the coolest features, is this pin holds on the front module, so you take that pin out, the entire front end, including the barrel, comes right off the gun. So if you have the larger variant like this, makes it much easier to stow away and transport. Or if you started with this and bought a shorter barrel front end assembly, you could SBS it yourself on a Form 1 and have that sort of variant as well. So anyway, not a lot of other history. I've looked to see if there's any type of police or military use. I mean, I know that they manufacture these for those applications, but being with the price point probably is a main killer of it for like military police application. I'm sure there are probably some departments in the United States or elsewhere around the world that use these, could not find any actual military contracts on these. So it is a very high-end consumer, shotgun. I have not personally fired them, but handling this, I can tell you, very well manufactured. And a lot of the reviews online, people have great luck with them. So don't typically have had a handful of these things in. They don't come in too often. So since I was making this video, I went ahead and grabbed this off the shelf to show you guys. So anyway, that is the Fostech Origin 12 shotgun. All right, guys, next up is an interesting pistol that comes to us from a local customer. So big thank you for selling us this one. This is the Czechoslovakian CZ VZ meaning Visor or Model 27. This is chambered in 32 ACP. It feeds from a detachable box magazine. It is single action only, hammer fired, has a magazine disconnect as well. This is the final sort of interwar iteration of Czechoslovakia's standard issue service pistol before Czechoslovakia would be invaded and occupied by Nazi Germany in 1939. But the history with this would actually begin a little bit earlier. So at the turn of the century, a lot of European countries, also including the United States, countries in Asia, are looking at moving into semi-automatic pistol technology, getting away from their previously enjoyed revolver technology. Please excuse the dogs in the background. I am filming from home. Now, in the United States, you have John Moses Browning Design 1911, which enters into service. You have Germany, Georg Luger's P08 Luger Design. And through the First World War, you're starting to see semi-automatic pistols creep into military service, but by the end of the First World War and through the interwar period, semi-automatic pistols are basically taking full stake in militaries across Europe and in other parts of the world as well. Now, there are two basic philosophies in how you're going to adopt a semi-automatic handgun. You have countries like Russia, which are getting away from the 1895 Nagant revolver and adopting something like this. This is the TT-33 using a full-powered pistol cartridge, such as the 7.62 by 25mm Tokarev round. And these would be issued to everybody who was issued a semi-automatic handgun, officers or grunts alike, and was viewed as a legitimate military implement to be used in fighting if it came down to handguns. This was going to be a viable firearm. It is the same cartridge used in their submachine guns, which are primary issue weapons as well. So the doctrine is this is a battle implement to be carried with officers or soldiers who might need their hands free for other purposes, artillery and that sort of thing. Or you are Italy and you have the implementation of a smaller caliber weapon like the 1934-1935 Berettas, which are in 380 9mm Quarto or 32 automatic. And these are going to be serving more as a officer's uniform piece a symbol of authority. You carry the pistol on you as a piece of your uniform. Yes, if you need to use it in any dire situation. You do have the handgun, but a small, tiny pocket .32 automatic or .380 pistol, not going to be something you're going to try and resort to outside of, your primary issue weapon or anything like that. So that's Italy's doctrine. You could be Germany, and of course we all know how the Germans are. They do both, so they have things like the P08 Luger and the P38. So that's going to be issued to personnel that might have a higher need for something that's going to be more of a combat piece, or you do have your smaller caliber pieces as well for officers and things like that. So what Czechoslovakia obviously attempted to do is more of the ladders, the smaller caliber, smaller profile pistol. And Czechoslovakia, through the Czech Republic, would actually keep this philosophy in use in their military up through the adoption of larger scale firearms, which you start seeing them switch over in the 80s and 90s around that time frame. Now, another interesting thing is this would come into service in 1927. It would replace the 1924, which was a .380 and a little bit more complicated to develop or to produce, but looks similar to this. That would replace the 1922 model, which was modeled after the Mauser 1915. Now, this would be in production by about 1928. It's in full-scale production all the way up through 1939 when Czechoslovakia gets occupied by Germany. Now, why would Germany go with this over the 1924 model, which was produced a little bit better and in a larger caliber, .380? Well, the Germans didn't have a use for the .380. They had smaller pistols like this, also in .32, or they used the 9mm full-size pistols, so they would opt to go ahead and fold all of these into German service and keep them in production. Now, a lot of these you see with German Waffenamps, the military acceptance marks, which this one has here. So not only do you have very cool interwar Czechoslovakian military history, you also have the history that sort of quantifies German occupation of smaller countries across Europe in the early stages of the Second World War, and Germany being a very pistol-centric country was very quick to adopt a lot of the military armament as it could use it in its own military service throughout its occupation of Europe and all the way through the end of the war. Now, in pop culture, these were made popular. Probably the most popular appearance of this pistol was in the movie Schindler's List, that very powerful scene where Amon Gert is attempting to terminate the life of a factory worker who failed to meet the or failed to produce a sufficient amount of hinges. His Luger fails. He resorts to pulling a CZ or a VZ-27 from his pocket, which also fails. And of course, he has to resort to just pistol whipping the factory worker, leaving him to live another day, actually through the end of the film. So, powerful scene. You see this in that scene as well. These are also known for shape-shifting into 1917 Smith & Wesson revolvers as well. So anyway, very cool firearm. Happy to get this one in and share it with you guys. That is the Czechoslovakian VZ-27. All right, up next is a very popular and very collectible pistol, which comes to us from a local customer. So big thank you for selling us this one. This is the Browning High Power. This particular one was made in 1993. You can tell it's a 90s model. The black plastic grips with a little thumb rest on them is a pretty good giveaway, as well as the safety mechanism with the extended sort of tail on it, or gripping surface, whatever you want to call it. Standard 3-dot sights were replaced with night sights. Single action only with a magazine disconnect, double stack, 13-round capacity, and 9mm. This is just in excellent condition. I'm very much a fan of the high powers. There's lots of different variations out there, from the modern FNs that they're putting out, Springfield with the SA35. There's companies in Turkey putting out clones, but nothing beats the traditional original Browning high power like this one. Now, the story with this would begin back in about 1915 when France, like a lot of other countries in Europe, like we just talked about with the VZ-27, they were looking at modernizing their modern military equipment. They wanted to move their handgun into a semi-automatic 9mm with a 10-round capacity or higher, which at the time is actually a pretty big feat to have to meet. Again, since semi-automatic pistol technology in general is a pretty nascent idea. Well, FN is looking at the successes of John Moses Browning, who across the pond is having a lot of popular success with the 1911 pistol, which was just adopted by the United States military. So who better to employ to come up with this new type of technology? Now, FN wanted in on this French contract. Of course, it was going to be a pretty lucrative thing. And if it could come up with a pistol meeting all these design elements, of course, it was going to be something that a lot of other countries would be interested in. which ends up happening after the development of the P35, or the high-power pistol, which we'll get into in a minute. But John Moses Browning accepts, and he's going to help FN come up with this pistol design for the French military contracts. Now the problem is Browning had just sold the rights or the patents to the 1911 to Colt, so he could make something, but it couldn't be close enough. It had to skirt around the patents, or it had to skirt around the design elements of the 1911 enough to not be in violation of, Colt's ownership rights of the 1911 design. So he would come to work, and he would start developing what is going to be the new FN high-power pistol. However, about 10 years later, in 1926, when the production of this, or the development of this, is well underway, John Moses Browning would pass away. Now, FN would pass on the project to their top designer, D&A Save. Now, D&A Save, also a very prolific arms designer, responsible for the development of the FN-49 and the FN-FAL. He would take this through to the finish line. Now, fortunately for D&A Save, 2 years after the passing of John Moses Browning, the patent rights to the Colt 1911 would expire. So he was able to incorporate some design elements from John Moses Browning's design on the 1911. So you could say John Moses Browning's genius and previous designs actually carried on posthumously into the final product, which was the FN High Power. So kind of a cool history on this pistol, and a sort of final testament to the design genius of John Moses Browning, and as well as D&A Save, both very well-respected arms designers in their own rights. Now, this would go into to production with Belgium as the P35, although France would actually never adopt this. They would stick with their own domestic designs, the SACM pistols and similar variants. When Nazi Germany would invade Belgium, they would take over production of these and fold them into their own military service. Now, Great Britain would adopt a variation of the high power as well post-war. Canada had the Inglis, which was a variation of the high power. So the high powers would actually stay in service. They're in use in different countries around the world today. And again, modern manufacturers are producing clones of these today. So, I mean, for the time, starting development in about 1916, finishing development around 1935, to be still as widely used as it is today, one of the only handguns that can share that type of history and lineage would be the 1911 itself, which this shares some elements. So, very cool pistol. I'm very happy to get this one in and share it with you. A beautiful example of a Belgian Browning high power. All right, guys, last but certainly not least is a very interesting piece of kit that comes to us from a customer in Pennsylvania. So thank you for selling us this. This is a live transferable German MG15 machine gun. Now, the story with this would begin at the conclusion of the First World War. Now, everybody knows that Germany lost the war, and because of that, the Versailles Treaty was put in place. Now, that would put limitations on the type of arms development that Germany could be investigating. It would put limitations on how many different machine guns or rifles or artillery pieces, tanks that Germany could produce, and down to the granular level, it would put restrictions on even the general size of the German military. On top of that, it would also impose that Germany would have to pay reparations or for damage that was put on Europe due to the First World War, as the Versailles Treaty basically made Germany assume responsibility for the war. Now, as you can imagine, almost immediately there was animosity in Germany towards the Versailles Treaty, and almost immediately privately held companies like Rheinmetall would start trying to be a little bit sneaky about getting around the Versailles Treaty. So, in the interwar period, Rheinmetall wanted to keep the ball rolling on arms development in Germany, specifically in the field light machine gun for ground infantry. After all, France is doing that with the Châtellerault in the 1920s. You have England doing that with the Bren machine gun in Czechoslovakia. You know, everybody's moving forward with new military equipment technology. Germany did not want to be left behind. So, in order to get around the Versailles Treaty, Rheinmetall would purchase a majority shareholder stake in Waffenfabrik Solothurn in Switzerland. So they would move production and arms development over there. Now, Louis Stange was going to be the head engineer responsible for coming up with the new field light machine gun. Louis Stange, if you remember the name, he is also the designer of the FG-42, so very prolific, prominent arms designer in Germany at the time. Now, his first design iteration, which was known as the MG30, came about in 1930, and early patents started being filed for that design around 1927 to 1928. It was an interesting open bolt machine gun, actually very similar to this, and I'll talk about why in a moment. Now, the Volkswehr, which was basically Germany's armed forces during the Weimar Republic, was going to have new requests for machine guns to come out to again replace the MG0815. Now the MG0815 was really a stopgap. It was a simplified, lightened version of the MG08, the heavy belt-fed water-cooled machine gun that you all know from the history books, the Devil's Paintbrush. But it was, although okay, and needed to be revised, and a new light machine gun or squad automatic weapon needed to come into service. Now, the MG13 would actually win the contract between the MG13 and the MG30. Earlier name designations were given to it again to conceal when it was produced, so the MG13 would go into service as the general infantry squad weapon in the interwar period, and it would see some service in early stages in the Second World War alongside the MG34. Now, the MG30 did not completely fall by the wayside. They did take design elements of the MG30 and incorporated two machine guns, the MG17 and the MG15, which is this. Now, both of them are aircraft machine guns. The MG17 was the fixed mount, so what you would find inside the wings or cowls in the wings and things like that. The MG15 would be the flexible mounted machine gun. So you typically go on these little studs here. They could go inside of a ball turret, on a waist mount, the rear seat, and a rear cockpit seat in an aircraft. I'm not too savvy on my German aircraft terminology, but this is what would be basically an all flexible mount German aircraft in the earlier parts of the Second World War. It had a very high rate of fire, fired from the open bolt, just like the MG30, fed from a detachable 70-round double saddle drum magazine, loaded with a loading tool. Had a very thin barrel shroud. Again, it's sitting outside in the slipstream of the aircraft to cool it down. Had spiderweb sight mounting points here and here, so that you could fire it at aircraft about 1,200 rounds per minute, so a similar fire rate as the MG42. Very simple design, very low profile, no shoulder stock, pistol grip here, and because you're not belt fed, it doesn't really matter what side you're feeding from, and it ejects straight out the bottom. Now, as the war would progress, armor would start increasing on aircraft, so the 30 caliber 7.92 Mauser round is not really enough to take down aircraft, so the armaments would start to change. First would go to the MG81, and then up from there, that was, typically you'd see those on the dual mounts, and then those would even be replaced by higher caliber autocannons and things like that. So what they did, for a couple reasons: A, later into the war, Germany starts losing, so they needed more war equipment. Because these are not really being used, they would design a ground mounting accessory. So this would go over the buttstock, and this would go over the barrel. This is a sort of cast, very lightweight shroud with an MG34 style bipod, and they would start incorporating them into field use, usually accompanied by a drum carrier that would hold 3 drums. So very, very cool, interesting, not only early sort of design off of the MG30, very early interwar / World War II machine gun technology, also early, aircraft machine gun technology. This was the first ever adopted flexible mounted machine gun by the German Armed Forces, and then later showing wartime ingenuity as they needed more machine guns to be able to adapt it to a ground role. So very cool firearm. These would actually be used in a ground water-cooled configuration in Yugoslavia post-war, so their legacy would carry on past the Second World War. But anyway, very, very cool firearm. Very happy to get this one in and share it with you guys. And that ends our video on this, the MG15. Well, that is all the time I have for you today on these. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out this video. If you enjoyed, please let me know by hitting that like button. Please also consider subscribing to my channel and hit that bell notification button so you are aware when we are posting new content. We're going to go ahead and leave you guys off with that. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.